Good morning and welcome to our event celebrating Black History Month during the pandemic. I am Dr. Liladhar Pense and I am the librarian for East European, Eurasian and Latin American Studies at UC Berkeley. I wanted to start this event by thanking all of our distinguished speakers and guests who have gathered here to celebrate Black History Month under unprecedented circumstances. Last year, our country and the world began to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. And now over 500,000 lives have been lost from all communities in the United States. So let us please take a brief minute of silence to remember those who have lost their lives in this pandemic. And after that, I will start introducing our speakers and give a brief introduction. Thank you once again for being here. The idea of organizing this webinar emerged as I began thinking about what I can do in a very tiny little way to contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. As a member of the American Libraries Committee on Diversity and as a member of the Racial Justice Task Force at UC Berkeley Library, I began consulting with my colleagues and faculty members, namely Professors Ulla Taylor and Professor Chiuma Elliott of African American Studies and African Diaspora Studies. All of them supported an idea of this event. So I should take a quick second to thank all of them and also my mentor and former Dean of San Mateo Community College Library, Ms. Lorita Ford, who guided me throughout my student and professional lives. I should thank our library's excellent communications team, namely Aisha, Amber, Tiffany, and Tor, who jumped in action to make this dream a reality. A word of gratitude and a shout out goes to the library administration and my dear friends and neighbors, Mr. Harold Goodman and Ms. Shanette, for all their help and advice at such a short notice. As Black History Month concludes, the participants in this webinar will provide reflections on the significance of this month for the African American community and the fields of African American studies and Black librarianship. Speakers will reflect on how pandemic has affected Black History Month celebration and what these changes mean for students, faculty, staff, and local communities. The panelists will explore questions on race, diversity, social justice, and the impact of misinformation on society and the Black community's creative soul. This webinar is being recorded, and I will start with introducing Dr. Renate Chancellor, Chair and Associate Professor of Library and Information Studies of Catholic University of America. She received her master's degree and PhD in information studies from UCLA. Dr. Chancellor's research focuses on human information behavior, organizational leadership, social justice in library and information science, and library education at HBCUs. She has published in scholarly journals and has presented her research in national and international venues. Her recent publications include E.J. Joshi, Transformational Leader in Modern Library Profession, Racial Battle Fatigue, The Unspoken Burden of Black Women Faculty in LIS, Struggling to Breathe, COVID-19, Protest and LIS Response, and Library on Frontlines, Neutrality and Social Justice. She is a recipient of the Association of Library and Information Study Science Education Leadership Award and the Alice Excellent Award in Teaching. So with further ado, I will hand the baton to Dr. Chancellor. Welcome, Dr. Chancellor.
Thank you, Dr. Pence, for the invitation to speak here. And I'm just going to bring up my slides. It's always wonderful to talk to people on the West Coast. I'm originally from the West Coast, so it's always wonderful to be speaking to people from California, my hometown. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about, in the short time that I have here, a little bit about the topic. And my topic is really going to be focusing on the celebration of Black librarians. As a researcher, I spend a lot of my effort and a lot of my work is into documenting the contributions of African-American librarians to the profession, because it is such an under-recognized area. But first, I like to say, we really do need more than a month to celebrate the myriad achievements of African Americans to history. So while I believe it is important to recognize Black History Month because it has been invisible, the contributions of Black people have been invisible over the years, we really it should not really be just 1 month set aside to celebrate the myriad and diverse and vast contributions of Black people. The past year has been an epic reminder about the harm of systemic racism and white supremacy that has had on the nation. Particularly this summer has been a rough time. This is a history that has been heavily entrenched in in American history. So that's another reason why it's so important to celebrate the achievements, because despite all the harmful acts and the hate that is perpetuated towards Black people have been able to rise above and make significant contributions. So even in the midst of hate and devastation, when you have Black skin, there are things to celebrate. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit about, just give you just a bit of a history about Black History Month per se. So Black History Month, many of you may know this, but some may not. It really started with Carter G. Woodson. And if you don't know about him, I encourage you to kind of look him up. And this idea of having a Black History Month really started in 1913, where the ASALH, which is the Association of African American Life and History, was founded. And it really started with a Negro History Week, and in 1926, and it didn't become a Black History Month until 1976, when then President Gerald Ford decided to have an actual month of Black History Month. Woodson and ASALH decided on the month of February, and it's the second week in February, to celebrate the birthdays of Frederick Douglass, as well as the birthday of Abraham Lincoln. So it's specifically targeted for February because of that. So that's really important to kind of understand. So what I want to do today is really highlight the contributions of Black librarians to the profession. And in order to do that, I want to provide a little bit of context. So because I am talking to the library community, many of you guys may know that the founding of the American library profession really started in 1876. And it was founded by predominantly white men, well, all white men. Probably you're most familiar with Melville Dewey, but there were other people as well, John Cutter, who founded the American library profession. So just keep that in mind. In 1888, we have, and it probably is earlier, but 1888, there were Jim Crow laws. And these laws really prevented, they were really harsh laws that prevented Black people from interacting with white people in general. And basically there was segregation. You couldn't really eat in the same spaces. You couldn't drink water from the same fountains. You really couldn't mingle at all. And so there were actually harsh laws and actually death that resulted in if you violated that. So we have a whole period of Jim Crow that really was primarily in the South, but it was all over the United States. In 1896, many of you guys who are civic or scholars or really our studies of students of history, you may be familiar with Plessy versus Ferguson as well. And in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson further supported this whole idea of segregation and Jim Crowism. In 1936, the American Library Association, this is the first time that there was policy that was implemented from ALA that said that they would no longer hold conferences where all their membership were not well received. So even in 1936, even ALA, who was founded on the principles of democracy and open to everyone, they still had issues with their state library associations in the South, primarily Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi. They did not allow members to their state library association. So for example, if you are members of the California Library Association, as I was once a member of CLA, and if you were Black during that particular time, and if California had this policy, Blacks could not be members of that association. In 1954, we see the first effort or movement towards segregation with Brown versus Board of Education, which pretty much said that schools could not discriminate against Black people. That's a very famous case. You're probably very familiar with it. And then 1964 was the Civil Rights Act, which pretty much outlawed any segregation. But we all know that these laws can be enacted, but you can't change people's thinking and the way people act. And so we know that we are still struggling, even to this day, of issues of hate, issues of white supremacy that has really, that has never really gone away. So I want to highlight a few notable librarians who have, and there are so many, but I wanted to kind of bring this to you since we are celebrating Black history and Black excellence. The first person that I want to profile is E.J. Dozie. He is the subject of my book. And he was a civil rights activist who really fought for equal rights for everyone in the profession, not only just Black people, but women as well. He was very known for being very outspoken about any type of discrimination, any towards Black people, towards women. He went on to become president of the American Library Association. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about those state library chapters, he is attributed with being integrating ALA because he fought the American Library Association on that policy, and he introduced a proposal that disbanded that segregation of those state southern chapters. So he's attributed with that. He did quite a bit of work. If you want to hear more about it, I'm happy to talk to you about it, or you can purchase my book. But he is a big figure in the field. Augusta Baker, she was a storyteller and children's librarian, and she is known for really fighting for how children are the images of Black people are how they are presented in children's books. And so she pretty much was a storyteller and a children's librarian and really fought for equality and how Blacks are portrayed in children's books. So if you don't know about her, I encourage you to look her up as well. There's actually an Augusta Baker Center attached to the University of South Carolina. It's a wonderful center. Clara Stanton Jones, wonderful woman. She was the first Black president of the American Library Association, and she was the public library director of the Detroit Public Library. She is significant because she is the first woman, period, who was the manager of a major library system, director of a major library system, which is what Detroit Public Library. And she had, obviously her position was controversial in how she became director. Like I said, she was president of the American Library Association, and she did a lot in terms of ALA and fighting for racial equality within the profession as well. So Clara Stanton Jones. The other person that you may or may not have heard, because not a lot of people talk about him, but Major Robert Owens. He is one of the only one that I know. There might be others, but he not only was a librarian, but he was also a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. He was a congressman. He actually, many of you may be aware of Shirley Chisholm. He actually preceded her. So I'm sorry, he succeeded her. So he filled her seat in Congress. And at the particular time, he worked with the Congressional Black Caucus. A lot of my work has kind of tied to the fact that the Black Caucus of the American Library Association was somewhat modeled behind the Congressional Black Caucus, in which he was a librarian earlier in his year before he became congressman. He also fought for information as well, so very significant contribution. And finally, Belle Decosta Green. She is very notorious for, she was the director of the J.P. Morgan Library. And if you don't know about her, you should look her up as well. I think there are a couple of biographies on her. She is fascinating for several reasons, but one thing is that her father is also very famous. Her father is Richard T. Greener. Not sure if you know him. He was the first Black to graduate from Harvard University, Harvard College at the time. And he went on to become the president of Howard University School of Law. Her name is Green because she has a really fascinating history. She dropped the Greener of her name because she wanted to kind of fit in during that period of time. She was also a fashionista. She wasn't like a typical librarian. She was all about manuscripts, and she became the director of J.P. Morgan Library in New York. And she was very close to the Morgans. They actually, when J.P. Morgan died, he left her $50,000, which would be equivalent to almost like $1.9 million today. But she did a lot in terms of her interest was in manuscripts and illuminated manuscripts. And so she was very notorious for her day. So she's very fascinating. Not typical librarianship, but more along the lines of manuscripts and illuminated manuscripts. So she is very fascinating. There are so many people that I could profile. This is just a short list of the contributions of African Americans to librarianship. So I encourage you guys, if you don't know about some of the people that I've mentioned, to kind of do some research on some of the names that I have here. Again, this list is not exhaustive. We currently have Carla Hayden. She is the Librarian of Congress now. She's significant because she is the first Black Librarian of Congress. We currently have a president who's the American Library Association, Julius Jefferson. So there are so many people who have made so many different contributions. I call them notable luminaries because I teach, I bring these people into in the classroom where I teach, and so that we can, curriculum can be infused with just more diverse perspectives. Because when I was at UCLA, I didn't have the benefit when I was working on my my graduate degree and my master's degree. I didn't have the benefit of hearing about all these contributions. So I incorporate this into my curriculum, my courses. I just finally want to leave you with this, that Black history is American history. I started by saying that we shouldn't just dedicate 1 month of the year to celebrate the contributions of Black people, Black librarians, but you really can't talk about history without talking about Black history. And so while I'm for celebrating Black history and for, because we've been erased, it's also important to know that you really can't study history without understanding the contributions of Black people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chancellor, for your wonderful presentation. There is a lot to think about the contributions of African-American scientists and information professionals to the librarianship. And I'm sure that there will be many questions. So please hold your questions, and as we go, you can type them in the question and answer rubric, and we will try to address them. Our next speaker is Miss Nichelle M. Hayes, Vice President, President-elect of Black Caucus of American Library Association. She holds MPA and MLS, and she is the founding leader of the Indianapolis Public Libraries Center for Black Literature and Culture, CBLC. She graduated from Indiana University School of Library and Information Science. She serves on a number of community boards throughout the state of Indiana, including the Indiana Black Librarians Network, an immediate past president, the NAACP, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. She is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which is a public service organization, Golden Life member. She is a blogger at the tieshatbind.blog, where she discusses genealogy and keeping families connected. She is also a guest columnist at Indianapolis Recorder newspaper. So Nichelle, Miss Hayes, welcome to our session, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, and following Dr. Chancellor is definitely scary, but I'm going to do my very best. I always learn so much when I hear her speak, and I would definitely encourage people to purchase her book on E.J. Josey. We should know more about the Black library luminaries that have given so much to the profession, but so many of them have gone unheralded. So, as Dr. Chancellor said, February is really just too small to use to talk about Black history. I like to think about February as an opportunity for you to whet your appetite, for you to learn more and think more about it. And I apologize, my screen is scrolling on its own. I like to tell people that I am Black 365 and not just in February. So I would encourage all of you that are doing programming and are networking with people in the community to tell them that we can do programs in March, in April, in May, in November, in October. We talked a little bit about having to pivot during this time of COVID and the quarantine, and I faced that as well. So someone who was used to doing large in-person programming, everything stopped in March, and then you had to turn to this virtual environment. I learned a lot. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to move forward with using those tools, with the virtual platforms, to be able to bring people together and to be able to connect in a way that we weren't able to connect when we were just physical. So the Black Arts Movement ran from 1965 to 1975, and I would like to say that it goes even beyond that. Larry Neal defined the Black Arts Movement as an aesthetic and spiritual sister of the Black Power concept. And so it envisions an art that directly speaks to the needs and aspirations of Black America. And so the purpose behind the Black Arts Movement is to celebrate and advance Black civil rights, also to advance Black self-determination, political beliefs, and political action utilizing Black arts and culture. Primarily, you would think of the Black Arts Movement as poetry, but as we've moved forward, it's definitely influenced hip hop as well as the visual arts. And so the Black Arts Movement did lay the foundation for the hip hop artists to express the trauma and the triumphs of Black Americans. And the development of Kwanzaa also occurred during this same time. Mari Evans is a member of the Black Arts Movement. She's an individual who was born in Ohio and later moved to Indianapolis, Indiana in 1947. She was a professor, a poet, a playwright, a pianist, a songwriter, a playwright. She was just a real Renaissance woman. One of her most powerful poems is I Am a Black Woman, and I'm going to take a moment to read that for you all. If you're not familiar with Mari Evans, I would encourage you to dig deeper and to learn more about her. I am a Black woman. I am a Black woman. The music of my song, some sweet arpeggio of tears, is written in a minor key, and I can be heard humming in the night, can be heard humming in the night. I saw my mate leap screaming to the sea, and I, with these hands, cupped the life breath from my issue in the canebrake. I lost Nat's swinging body in a rain of tears and heard my son scream all the way from Anzio for peace he never knew. I learned Da Nang and Pork Chop Hill in anguish. Now my nostrils know the gas, and these trigger-tired fingers seek the softness in my warrior's beard. I am a Black woman, tall as a cypress, strong beyond all definition, still defying place and time and circumstance, assailed, impervious, indestructible. Look on me and be renewed. And I would say that each time I read and reflect on that piece, I think of something new. And I would hope that as we move forward in these trying times, that we look on that piece and we receive hope that people have gone through challenging times before and they have been able to come out on the other side. And so that which Mari Evans had within her, we also have a little bit of that. And so if we can take some of that to move forward as we're going about our daily lives, dealing with COVID and racial unrest, I think that can help us to just move forward and be renewed, as she mentions. Another individual that was a part of the Black Arts Movement is Etheridge Knight. So he was actually born in Mississippi, but he and his family moved to Indiana later. He served in the Korean War. He was actually injured with shrapnel. He was able to be discharged from the military, and then he struggled with substance abuse and then became a part of the criminal justice system, unfortunately. But during that time he was there, he tapped into the power of poetry. And after he was released from prison, he wrote his first book of poetry in 1968, Poems from Prison. I'm going to read just one of his haikus, and he was able to use Gwendolyn Brooks as a mentor, and so they were contemporaries as well. Making jazz swing in 17 syllables ain't no square poet's job. And so during that time that he was writing, Gwendolyn Brooks reached out to him and talked to him about parsing down his writing and not being as verbose as he was. And so he took that to heart and he started working on haikus. If you've ever done haikus before, you know how difficult it is to manage those and to do it well. And he was definitely able to do that. I'm going to try to pull my screen back up because I did lose that. And actually, because it's not coming up, I'm just going to move forward. So thank you for your patience. So Amira Baraka was actually the founder of the Black Arts Movement. And he and many other people were integral with that, but also women were a part of the Black Arts Movement. So I've already mentioned Mari Evans, Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez. There are a lot of people that took part in that and gave us something that we needed. As I said before, even though technically the Black Arts Movement stopped in 1975, we have still been able to pull from that with visual artists as well as spoken word poets. And so as we move forward, I want us to think about not just the protests, but also the hope that these artists are sharing with us. And we are Black 365, not just in February. And so that's definitely something for us to share with people. And I want to read to you kudos to librarians. I really appreciated that moment of silence at the beginning of our program. So many of us have lost loved ones, and it's good to remember and reflect on them. But I also want us to pour into ourselves so we're able to continue to do this work. And so this poem is by Nikki Giovanni, My First Memory of Librarians. This is my first memory. A big room with heavy wooden tables that sat on a creaky wood floor, a line of green shades, banker's lights down the center, heavy oak chairs that were too low, or maybe I was simply too short for me to sit in and read. So my first book was always big. In the foyer, up 4 steps, a semicircle desk presided to the left side of the card catalog. On the right, newspapers draped over what looked like a quilt rack. Magazines face out from the wall. The welcoming smile of my librarian, the anticipation in my heart, all those books, another world, just waiting at my fingertips. So I would like everyone to take that with them as they continue with this work. You are significant, you are important, you are pouring into your communities, you're pouring into individuals, adults, and children. And so the work you're doing is important. And so I would like you to hold on to that and think about the work that we're doing every day and not just in February. And now I will hand this over to Mr. Demerson.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. I'm going to give a brief introduction to our colleague and our guest, Mr. Bamidele Agbasekbe Demerson. He serves as the chief curator of the African American Museum and Library at Oakland, AAMLO, a branch of the Oakland Public Library. Prior to affiliation with AAMLO, Demerson served in executive positions in Southern and Midwestern museums in Austin, Texas, Greensboro, North Carolina, Roanoke, Virginia, and Detroit, Michigan. A cultural anthropologist by training, Demerson received his undergraduate and graduate training at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He also earned his MA degree in museum studies from Southern University at New Orleans. Demerson has taught at Washtenaw Community College in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Southern University at New Orleans in Louisiana. Results of his anthropological fieldwork in Ghana and Nigeria, in West Africa, and in Cuba, Brazil, and the Southern United States, in the African diaspora have focused on kinship and comparative family studies, as well as visual art. His research initiatives in anthropology and culture history have been presented at national and international conferences and published in refereed journals, anthologies, and exhibition catalogs. So, Mr. Demerson, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. I'm trying to bring up my screen now.
Please take your time, sir. Please
okay, just 1 second. I'm sorry for the difficulty, but I have someone to come and assist me. I'm not technologically savvy.
Sir, that's perfectly all right. I wanted you to know that we can hear you beautifully.
Okay, thank you. Okay, where do I?
Where's your mouse? Oh, you just have to hit that to move
Oh, okay.
And the
Okay.
screen is going, so you look,
Okay.
everything looks great.
Okay, thank you. My presentation is titled African American Men and Women Who Built Oakland, a children's storybook initiative from the African American Museum and Library at Oakland, where we are indeed, we celebrate Black history, Black culture, and Black aesthetic expression every day. During the mid-1940s, Eugene and Ruth Lasardame and Jesse and Dr. Marcella Ford started collecting stories, papers, photographic records, and various artifacts that wove together an ever-growing narrative that documented Black men and women who built Oakland. 25 years later, they incorporated as the East Bay Negro Historical Society. The nascent institution opened a storefront, organized a bevy of public programs, and curated exhibitions based on its holdings. After years of continued growth, the group moved its contents to the Golden Gate branch of the Oakland Public Library and changed its name to the Northern California Center for African American Life and History and Life. But with continued development, the center later officially merged with the Oakland Public Library to become the African American Museum and Library at at Oakland, whose initials are AAMLO. It moved into the rehabilitated 1902 Carnegie Building at 659 14th Street, a Beaux Arts edifice that once served as the public library for the city of Oakland. A dream envisioned since the 1940s had become a reality. AMLO houses a museum with a long-term exhibition and changing galleries, a non-lending library, a seed library, and a set of archives that includes more than 160 collections. Researchers from all over the globe consult the archives, a valuable resource to explore documents related to pioneers, prominent families, houses of worship, social organizations, and political associations active or once active in the Bay Area. Much of the collection is available. With finding aids via the online archives of California and the digital gateway Calisphere that provides access to collections in libraries, archives, and museums throughout California. Investigative access to AMLO's holdings is important, but how do we democratize that access beyond the interests of the researcher? Like the founders of past years, AMLO hosts exhibitions and a variety of public programs that have educational value. During the 2019-2020 fiscal year, AMLO published a monthly calendar of offerings. For example, the November 2019 calendar and others carried the notice. The first shipment of African captives arrived in English-speaking North America at Jamestown, Virginia in August 1619. Programs at AMLO from August 2019 to August 2020 are part of our observance of the 400-year span of African American history, culture, and aesthetic expression. The roster of offerings featured the long-term exhibitions Visions Toward Tomorrow, the African American Community in Oakland, 1890 to 1990. It featured a temporary exhibition, Ruth Beckford, a visionary woman, based on the papers that she gifted to the archives. Other offerings grouped under the headings Perspectives included the American Black Beauty Doll Artist Show and Sale. We also had a program revisiting Toni Morrison on how the award-winning author, late author, also reflected themes in the works of Black women writers right here from Oakland. And then we also had a community conversation on the new film Harriet about the activities of an abolitionist on the eve of the Civil War, and and there were also selected books for our children's story hour. The staff at AMLO assembled children's books, fictional and true, that shaped an understanding of African-American life and lore. But in the aftermath of the pandemic, COVID-19, AMLO's programming initiatives shifted to a virtual format. For children, the staff located online recorded storybooks that featured an adult reader. Moreover, as a service to facilitate education in the home environment, especially during COVID-19, the staff published lesson plans for each of the books that appeared on our website. The staff consulted pedagogical objectives established by the California Board of Education for elementary students in 3 areas. That would be English language arts, history and social sciences, and visual arts. The 2-page lesson plan included, for example, a bibliographic citation of the book, a location of the online recorded story, a synopsis. Then we had the objective of the lessons, resources, materials, a geography component, vocabulary building exercises, questions and answers, and a reinforcing art activity. In the wake of the pandemic, AMLO decided to revisit, rewrite, and resubmit a grant application to procure funding for a pilot study, creating children's storybooks from the archives of AMLO. A small sampling of 20th century heroic men and women include an engaging set of persons with excitingly distinctive backgrounds. They built Oakland, and by extension, they built America too. Frances Mary Albreyer was trained as a nurse, but she was also a human rights activist, and she is especially remembered for her threatened lawsuit and community pressure that persuaded Kaiser Shipyards to hire her as the first Black female welder. C.L. Dellums, a labor activist, is best known as an organizer and leader of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He also grappled with the issues of police brutality and the deplorable conditions impacting Black agricultural workers. Ida Louise Jackson is remembered as an educator and a philanthropist. She holds the distinction as the first African-American woman to teach in Oakland's public schools and the first Black woman to teach in a California high school. Maury Turner, a cartoonist, created We Pals, the first syndicated strip with a cast of ethnically diverse characters. In 1970, he served as the co-chairman of the White House Conference on Children and Youth. Ruth Beckford, a dancer and choreographer, performed with the legendary Katherine Dunham and directed the Ruth Beckford African-Haitian Dance Company. She also co-created the Free Breakfast Program with the Black Panther Party. And Benjamin V. Williams, a reporter for print and broadcast journalism, gained award-winning distinction with the CBS affiliate KPIX. He was the first African-American television news reporter in Northern California. Now, these are just a few examples of persons from who are included in our archives. No institution with a dedicated focus on African-American life and lore has used its archival collection to create a series of illustrated children's storybooks. What AMLO proposes is a unique initiative. To accomplish this project, there is a set of sequential steps that must be followed. We must first write and submit grant applications to secure funding. And I hope that we will be able to secure such funding either from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, or for California Humanities. Then we must convene discrete focus groups to determine what narratives might excite children and maintain their interest. At least one group should be composed of elementary school age children. Another one should focus on elementary school teachers. And yet another one should be filled with community stakeholders, and that's very broadly defined. We need to define the pilot project with a focus on a small number of books, 2 or possibly 4 or maybe 6 even, to allow AMLO to learn and refine the process of engaging writers, illustrators, and art directors and project managers familiar with the production of illustrated children's storybooks. The books in the pilot study will focus on both male and female subjects in equal numbers. We then need to require commissioned writers and illustrators to meet periodically in a workshop styled environment to engage in research on their assigned subject. The commissioned writers and illustrators will receive instructions from the consulting coach. The commissioned writers and illustrators will also engage in peer review or peer critiques. Then it's important for us to develop some degree of uniformity when creating the books. We need to develop a style guide in consultation with the coach. And this is just an example. The stories and illustrations should appeal to those in grades K through 3, roughly ages 5 through 8. Each book will adhere to a word count, let's say 600 to 1,000 words. The books in this series will measure perhaps 10 inches by 12 inches. Each publication will contain perhaps 32 leaves. Each image will cover 2 pages. This is to give us some sense of uniformity to the series of books that we plan to publish. We need to identify master educators who will be commissioned to develop lesson plans for each book. The lesson plans will also adhere to the same format. Teachers will consult pedagogical standards identified by the California State Board of Education in 3 areas: English language arts, history and social sciences, and visual arts. Then we need to confer with faculty in area universities, schools of education, to develop meaningful experiences for students. That is to say, those who are future teachers who need to earn lab hours observing and working with elementary school age pupils. Then finally, we need to develop an exhibition and based on the initial publications. Moreover, we need to promote the project as an opportunity to procure donations of archival materials related to notable Black men and women in the city of Oakland. African-American men and women who built Oakland possesses a unique opportunity to democratize access to the contents of archival material held by AMLO. With a special focus on children, this Bay Area institution has the potential to expose children of all backgrounds about the contributions and achievements of Blacks who were bold pioneers in this experiment that we call the United States of America. And so that's one of the initiatives that's underway here at the African American Museum. And thank you so very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bamidele, for your introduction and explanation of how African American men and women contributed to the success of building of Oakland, and these contributions can never be forgotten. So I will segue into our next speaker's presentation. But before that, I must admit that Diakon Reginald Lyles is one person that everybody knows in Oakland. He was the senior advisor for the public safety to Oakland Mayor Jean Kwan, and I hope that I'm pronouncing it correctly. Lyles is a retired career law enforcement officer, command level, and he has served for 30 plus years as the diacon of Allen Temple Baptist Church, one of the largest African-American churches in the West Coast, I believe, and also in the country. He is also a recent Master of Community Leadership and Leadership Divinity graduate and Bible Scholar Award winner of the American Baptist Seminary of the West. Diakon Lyles teaches, trains, and advises churches, governmental and non-governmental organizations, locally and across the country on issues of public safety and civil and human rights. Please allow me in extending warm welcome to Diakon Lyles. Sir, it is yours. Thank you.
Good morning. I want to give thanks and honor to God, first of all, for this morning. I want to thank God for allowing us to witness it. I want to thank Allen Temple Church, my pastor, Jackie Thompson, Dr. Jackie Thompson, and Pastor E, and Class 9 for nurturing and maintaining a womb for liberation. I want to thank you, librarians, for understanding and following your telos. The world needs to preserve truth-telling libraries and librarians. I want to thank you for desiring to have this event. Black history is American history. It is world history. And I want to thank Dr. Linda Hard-Pinsey for taking on the responsibility for making this event come to fruition. I know it was not easy, but he had felt it was necessary. So thank you, sir. I want to thank our African foreparents, as far back as Cush, Nubia, Kemet, and all that they developed from the 42 declarations of innocence, Ma'at, to the pyramids, to Hesse Ray, the first dentist, and the first author of the first book. I want to thank those who survived the Atlantic slave trade and endured the greatest sin done to humankind, chattel slavery in the Americas. I want to thank those who found the spirit of the living God through the invisible church in Bush Arbors that has become today's Black church, a Black church that has produced Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, who founded the AME Church in Philadelphia in 1787. Jarena Lee, the first female ordained preaching woman in 1819 in the AME Church. To Harriet Tubman, who escaped slavery by walking from Maryland Eastern Shore to Philadelphia, some 90 miles in 1849. Harriet then had the audacity to return 17 times to rescue her parents, siblings, and others. From Richard Allen to Howard Thurman, to Adam Clayton Powell, to Malcolm X, to Martin Luther King Jr., to John Lewis, to Saint Oscar Romero, the Salvadorian Roman Catholic Archbishop, who was a vocal critic of the violent activities of government armed forces, to wominists like Katie G. Cannon, to Jacqueline Grant, to Dolores Williams, to William Barbers, to Senator Raphael Warnock, to our own Michael McBride. Liberation and liberation theology is the true message from God. Everyone is worthy of freedom. However, many disagree, and we can't understand Black history unless we understand their disagreement in their behavior. And they produce lies and obstacles and violence to inhibit the attaining of that freedom. Make no mistake about it. This is what we witnessed on January 6, 2021. In today's turbulent times, we African Americans are still confronted with lies and stereotypes of the past that's not really the past. For example, Colin Kaepernick gets eviscerated by the former President Donald Trump for taking a knee during the national anthem to draw attention to police brutality towards African Americans. He is deemed by the white press as being un-American, when what he was doing was one of the most American things to do, peaceful protest. Kaepernick peacefully protested by taking a knee. No one got beaten or injured. Kaepernick merely raised the question of brutal law enforcement that is out of control, resulting in the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, and Sandra Bland, to name just a few. The unworthiness and the incompetence that white America places onto African Americans is a lie and requires that we confront the lies without ceasing. That is the telos of librarians. That is what you scholars do. This is the purpose of this event. It was Thomas Jefferson who stated in 1681 that, and I quote, African Americans have never produced art, great art, or rhetoric. How could they possibly be considered equal citizens? This was a false claim about an absence of creativity of the mind or imagination, has served as one of the linchpins of white supremacy for more than 300 years, and as one of the foundational assumptions still held by many whites concerning what they view as Black inferiority. When Jefferson wrote the lies in his book, Notes on the State of Virginia, in 1781, and updated and enlarged the book in 1782 and 1783, Jefferson was responding to the questions about Virginia posed to him in 1780 by Francois Berby-Monbois, the then secretary of the French delegation in Philadelphia, the temporary capital of the United States. Notes on the State of Virginia is both a compilation of data by Jefferson about the state's natural resources and economy, and his vigorous argument about the nature of the good society, which he believed was incarnated in Virginia. Jefferson expressed his beliefs in the separation of church and state, constitutional government, the rule of law, checks and balances, and individual liberty. He wrote extensively about slavery, his dislike of race mixing. Parenthetically, while he was raping Sally Hemings and fathering 6 children, Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Easton, who survived to adulthood. A justification of white supremacy and his belief that whites and Blacks could not coexist in a society where the Black population was free. Jefferson knew better. He was academically aware of Nubian, Kush, and Kemet cultural advancements in science, architecture, medicine, astronomy, and engineering. Jefferson had borrowed their ideas on architecture, agriculture, and science. According to author Charles A. Serrani, who wrote the book Benjamin Banneker, Surveyor, Astronomer, Publisher, Patriot, published by the John Wiley & Sons, Jefferson was personally aware of Benjamin Banneker, who designed and surveyed Washington, D.C. streets, and who taught Jefferson surveying by leading Jefferson on surveying exploration trips into the Ohio Valley. Consequently, Jefferson's comments were racist, lies, and fascist. Jefferson seemed to have overlooked the fact that the conditions of human slavery, of which he was a practitioner, hardly contributed to an atmosphere of creative intellectual expression. However, when left alone, as Frederick Douglass often observed and encouraged, African Americans have demonstrated over and over again their abilities. African Americans have contributed in significant ways in every arena of intellectual and artistic expression. Consider the link from Phyllis Wheatley to Maya Angelou, Andre Ward to Toni Morrison, Toni Cade Bambara, Jesmyn Ward, Zora Neale Thurston, Lorraine Hansberry, Alice Walker, Bell Hooks to Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Amanda Gorman in literature. Think of the determination that ties Bessie Coleman, who earned her airplane pilot's license in France in 1921, to the unmatched heroism of the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, to the 14 African-American astronauts who flew on NASA-sponsored mission into space. Or think of Mary Jackson, Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, the mathematical geniuses who did math without computers to get John Glenn's 1962 successful trip around the globe. Think about the global impact of artists, from Shakespearean actor Ira Aldridge to Denzel Washington, who many have claimed is the best actor of the 21st century thus far. Think of the majesty of Kathleen Battle and Jesse Norman in classical music. Is it really so difficult to imagine the genius that links W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the first Black person to earn a PhD from Harvard University, to Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is the current director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Center for African American Research at Harvard? Consider the gallantry and the devotion to country exhibited from the United States colored troops, to name a few, including Sergeant William H. Carney, who was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, who earned the honor for protecting one of the United States' greatest symbols during the Civil War, the American flag. Sergeant George Jordan, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, who repulsed the large force of indigenous natives on 2 separate occasions in the Indigenous American Wars. Or Dennis Bell, Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, who voluntarily with a sure in the face enemy gunfire and aided in the successful rescue of his wounded comrades after several failed attempts in the Spanish-American War. But Sergeant Henry Johnson, on May 14, 1918, while on watch in the Argonne Forest, he fought off a German raid in hand-to-hand combat, killing multiple German soldiers and rescuing a few soldiers while experienced 21 wounds. Sergeant Johnson, because his race, was denied the Congressional Medal of Honor until President Barack Obama posthumously awarded it to him on June 2nd, 2015. Or Staff Sergeant Edward Carter Jr., who was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in World War II on March 23rd, 1945, for extraordinary heroism in Speyer, Germany. When the tank he was riding received heavy bazooka fire, Sergeant Carter voluntarily attempted to lead a 3-man group across an open field. 2 of his men were killed and a 3rd seriously wounded. Continuing on alone, he was wounded 5 times, finally was forced to take cover. As 8 enemy riflemen attempted to capture him, Sergeant Carter killed 6 of them and captured the remaining 2. He then crossed the field, using them as a shield. Sergeant Carter, fluent in German, made it back and obtained valuable information concerning the disposition of enemy troops. It was Lieutenant Colonel Charles Calvin Rogers who was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor while in Phichuk region near Cambodia. Although too severely wounded to physically lead the defenders, Lieutenant Colonel Rogers continued to give encouragement and direction to his men in defeating and repelling the enemy attack. And many don't know about Michael Healy, the naval captain, nicknamed Hell Roaring Mike, who was born in 1839 in Jones County, Georgia. His mother was an African woman. His father was an immigrant from Ireland. He had 15 brothers and sisters. He left his home, he had 10 brothers and sisters. He left home early and went out to sea. He sailed in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic, in the South China Sea. Came back to the United States. He was given a captainship, and he was given the responsibility to be law enforcement in the Pacific from Alaska to San Diego. He served more than 20 years. He patrolled over 20,000 miles. It is said that the author Jack London was so inspired by Healy's command of the renowned USRC Bear that he wrote about him. And it said that the United States Coast Guard emanated out of the service that Captain Healy served in. Think of General Colin Powell, who served as the chairman, Joint Chief of Staff, and later the Secretary of State, to our present day General Lloyd Austin, the first Black Defense Secretary. Thomas Jefferson could never have imagined these things. Like Hiram Revels, who in 1859 was the first African American to serve in the United States Senate, much less Barack Obama, who was serving in the United States Senate when he was elected in 2008 to become the 44th president of these United States. Nor could Thomas Jefferson imagine the skill and the wisdom and the courage of a Harriet Tubman to the wisdom and courage of our present day Vice President Kamala Harris. The assault on Black excellence is never ending, but it is forever morphing into new strategies of racism and fear. One of the latest I will raise is this recent 6th Southern Baptist Convention seminarian presidents who denounced the critical race theory as heretical and Marxist. However, according to Dr. Derek Bell, critical race theory is the view that the law and legal institutions are inherently racist, and that race itself, instead of being biologically grounded and natural, is a sociologically constructed concept that is used by white people to further their economic and political interests at the expense of people of color. According to critical race theory, race inequality emerges from social, economic, and legal differences that white people create between the races to maintain elite white interests in the labor markets and politics, and giving rise to poverty and criminality in many minority communities. According to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality is what is described how race, class, and gender and other individual characteristics intersect with one another and overlap. The assault never ends, but we must address them with truth and courage. I even wrote a rebuttal to a recent attack by 2 Southern Baptist ministers. It was published in the Baptist News Journal on January 26th. On January 22nd, Tom Buck, First Baptist Church of Lindale, Texas, equated Vice President Kamala Harris with the biblical character Jezebel. It was a strategic insult designed to terrorize and imbued Harris. He was joined by Steve Swafford, the pastor of First Baptist Church of Rockwell, Texas, in this insult. This is an old psychological strategy to dehumanize a woman as a justification to do her violence. According to Sherry Hambry, writing in Psychology Today, and I quote, she said, people use dehumanization to justify greed, violence, and abuse. Although dehumanization is most associated with right-wing nationalism, others have used dehumanizing language to dehumanize also. Dehumanization involves redefining the targets of prejudice and violence by making them seem less human, that is, less civilized and less sentient. than other people. She continues to explain that the classic strategy for this is to use terms like animals and vermin, referring to people as illegals, is also dehumanizing. Pastor Buck and Swofford have a responsibility as pastors to spread the Christian gospel of justice, liberation, truth, and love. Contrarily, they have co-opted the Old Testament story of Jezebel and transformed it into a fuse that can lead to a stick of dynamite, causing pain and even death. Pastor Buck and Swofford use coded biblical language to dehumanize and to bully Vice President Harris. They weaponize the biblical text to potentially incite some poor soul to do violence to her. As a reminder, this is no great leap. There is a partial history of assassination and attempted assassination of presidents and elected leaders in the United States. You remember John Wilkes Booth and Abraham Lincoln, or John Strank, who attempted to assassinate Teddy Roosevelt, or Giuseppe Joe Zangara, who attempted to assassinate Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or Lee Harvey Oswald, who was accused of assassinating John F. Kennedy, or Saran, who assassinated Robert F. Kennedy, or James Earl Ray, who was accused of assassinating Martin Luther King Jr., or Arthur Bremer, who attempted to assassinate George Wallace, or Lynette Squeaky Fromm, who attempted to assassinate Gerald Ford, or John Warnock Hinckley, who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan, or Jared Lee Longner, who attempted to assassinate Gabrielle Gifford. When questioned about this and challenged, Pastor Buck tweeted, "I can't imagine any truly God-fearing Israelite who would have wanted their daughter to view Jezebel as an inspirational role model because she's a woman in power." Then he doubled down in the face of criticism, tweeting, "I 100% stand by it," and insisting, should Jezebel, who governs in a godless way, have been a role model simply because she's a woman in power? If not, why should Kamala, who's governed in a godless way, be the role model just because she's a woman in power? Pastor Swofford preached about President Biden, calling him cognitively dysfunctional and adding, what if something happens to him? Jezebel has to take over. Jezebel Harris, isn't that her name? Unquote. This is the height of racism, misogyny, and weaponizing the biblical text to harm and to do violence. However, I'm not shocked about their evil. However, our vice president, an Afro-Asian American, deserves all the respect, all the dignity, and protection that our office that she holds demands. Additionally, every Black woman and every woman must be defended from bullies, even if those bullies have pulpits and sprout their corrupt misunderstanding of the biblical text and their inciting of violence. Ibram X. Kendi wrote in his book, Stamped from the Beginning, some of us who comment on racial inequalities these days are averse to such accounts of Black history, thinking them romantic and not frank enough about the ravages of racism. So I hope that no one is confused by my words. American racism is unquestionably rapacious. To identify the achievement and exhilaration of Black life is not to butte or to minimize racism, but to shame racism, to damn it to hell. The masters were wrong in their antebellum South when they described the body shaking, delighted chuckle of an enslaved person as simple-mindedness. No, that laugh, like our music, like our language, like our movement, was a testimony that refused the terms of our degradation. In the footage of protests over the past several weeks, we've seen Black people dancing, chanting, and singing. Do not misunderstand. This is not an absence of grief or rage or distraction. It is insistence. And so I must turn in the criticizing gaze back on any who offer it to me, because they cannot understand the spiritual majesty of joy and suffering. But my rejection of their account also comes with an invitation. If you join us, you might feel not only our pain, but also the beauty of being human. Lastly, I'll end with this little poem that came to me a couple of days ago. I'm not a poet, but I'll just give God the credit. I call it Gangster from Galilee. I follow the melanin gangster rabbi, a Nazarene thug with a golden heart, love for the disenfranchised and the set apart. Called 12 Galilean homies into his crew and challenged them to become fishers of men and women too. Ask Caiaphas, the high priest. Ask the temple cult. Ask hand-washing Pontius Pilate, the miscreant. Would they all agree that Jesus was a Galilean deviant? Didn't he challenge the system of just laws and the status quo? Didn't he upset the money changers and the corporate money flow? Didn't he heal the demoniac on the other side of the lake, bless the woman at a Samaritan well for love's sake, and empowered the wretched of the earth by defeating the grave and hell? The American Christ, jingoistic, materialistic, seems an apostasy to me. No way is the American Christ my cup of tea. I'm down with the Nazarene gangster who died for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Deacon Lyles. I don't know where to start because all of the participants have given us, I will not call it an excursion because excursion is not fun on a certain level, but they have given us food for thinking. How the African-American community members have countlessly contributed to the idea of a free America. An America which, when I was in India, on the borders of slum, I was dreaming, oh, what that means. May I go there one day? Will I be accepted? You know, you have put everything in the perspective, which you have like opened my eyes. Dr. Chancellor talking about contributions of African-American information professionals, you know, her book on E.J. Joshi, for example. Nichelle Hayes talking about reading the poetry itself, you know, the poetry goes through our soul. Mr. Bamidele talking about how Black men and women built Oakland. You know, we always hear all these type of funny anecdotes, but I don't experience it on my skin, literally speaking. But with the same token, you have inspired me as a librarian to speak out against systemic racism, against issues which are often swept under the rug, using the words like simple-minded. Oh, that foreigner. Oh, you are a good one. Oh, they're all bad, but you are the good one because you play by the rules. So, and finally, Deacon Lyles, I cannot thank you enough for your, I will call it, very, very thought-provoking discourse. You know, we are a secular university where everybody is welcome, but I understand that African-American history is also tied to African-American churches on many levels. So it will be inappropriate for me to dissect it out. We don't deny, but we have questions. So one of the questions I have to all of the panelists, and please turn on your cameras if you don't mind, is what message we should take today. I understand one message was not a single month can encapsulate the contributions and the celebrations of those contributions in the United States of African Americans, right? It's a 365 event. But what is your relevant message for upcoming inner city youth who are often left out? Is education tool to success? How can we empower and build I will not call a world new America because it has been overused, but America which is just, fair, and accepting of other people's diversities. Could you please give us some starting points so we can learn from you? And we have like few minutes left, so I wanted to speak up, please. Thank you. Dr. Chancellor, Dr. Miss Hayes, Bamidele, Deccan Lyles, please convey your message. I know you have already given, yeah.
Well, I guess I can start. I think it's important for academics to understand that that the history that Blacks have experienced, and I think the speakers all did a great representation of, of communicating the challenges Blacks have had historically and presently. And I think it's important just to embrace that. And when I say embrace, I mean acknowledge it, recognize that it exists, and do what you can to get rid of it. Often I heard during the most recent events with George Floyd over the past summer was that by white colleagues were, what can we do? Oh, I feel sorry. What can I do? I want to do something. Well, I think it's just as important for people of color to speak up about injustice that they see as it is for other people as well, other races. Maybe even more so important to do that. So I think it's in the experience and then just being open to the experiences that we have and not dismissing it, acknowledging it, and reckon with it. I think those are key points as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Chancellor. I will go next and I will be brief. I think what I would say is that we need co-conspirators. We need people that are not whispering to us after the meeting or texting us. We need someone to stand up with us, for us, in the meeting. We need them to call out white supremacy right then. You know what it looks like. You know what the impact is. We need you to stand up. I should not have to dismantle a system that I did not create. So for some of you that might not be aware, it's called the Black tax. And so we're then heaped on us DEI work in addition to what we're already doing. And I would dare say most of us are already underpaid. And so Jason Reynolds, who wrote Stamp from the Beginning, or Stamp Jr., with Dr. Ibram Kendi, he said, listen to Black women. Listen to what they're saying. They're highly educated. They have their finger on the pulse. And check in with your Black and brown employees because they're having a totally different experience. Thank you, Deacon Lyles. They're having a totally different experience than the rest of you. So it's more than just a reading list. We need action. Thank you.
I would recommend that they get D'Angelo's book, White Fragility. If you're that naive, I'm at this point in my life where I don't accept that naivety. I think it's, I don't want to use the word I'm thinking right now, but it's just, leave me with that. You know what you're doing. You know what the person is doing that you don't agree with, but your silence is acceptance and is condoning. So if you don't have to stand up in the, and take anybody on, just vote right. Walk away from them. Chastise the person in the middle of the sentence or the action that they're doing that's racist. Challenge their white fragility. Challenge their white fragility. What are you afraid of? Ask that question. Why are you afraid of them? It's just, it's ridiculous. And don't think you informed if you only listening to, Trumpism. You're not even being rational. Please be rational. I believe in the rule of law and the power of evidence. And I believe in research. And I believe in, cogent arguments. And so that's when you make a decision, not when somebody pulls something out of the, I don't know where, and makes a myth about it, and then you run off and then you cover that with a thin veil of theology. You cannot really take theology out of it, because the theological misunderstanding ordains or allows folks to do things to people, because they operate under the misconception that God is blessing us to do this. No, it wasn't manifest destiny. You were wiping out people. That wasn't manifest destiny. That wasn't manifest destiny. You were killing thousands of people. That was genocide. That's what that was. So we have to be thinkers along that line. And then for my African Americans, no matter where you are, no matter what position you're in, stand your ground. The fight is yours. The fight will continue. And then we pass the baton.
Thank you so much.
And I would say we must tell our truth and be uncompromising
Yes,
in telling the truth.
yes, sir.
I remember some years ago when I was working in another museum, and the persons of the board of directors for the museum came to me and said, well, you know, I was summoned to their meeting and said, we haven't had an exhibition on interracial relationships. And I said, oh, well, you know, that's a very broad topic. But, and I had already thought of one, and it was titled From Thomas Jefferson to Strom Thurmond, A History of White Pedophiles and Black Virgins. And of course, that almost got me fired. But I had to stand in my truth and say, okay, what kind of exhibit do you want then? And I said, I'm willing to approach this topic. And this was at a Black museum with Black boards of directors.
Well, you know, all of you have pushed me to the limits to think about what I can do as a librarian to contribute. And, you know, I cannot thank you enough. You know, I wish I could have the whole day to speak to all of you. Thank you for sharing your lives and moments of your lives out of your busy schedule. Dr. Chancellor, Ms. Hayes, Dr. Lyles, and of course, Bamidele. You know, I was afraid to approach Mr. Bamidele on the phone because I don't know, his voice was so serene and calming, but with the same token, I said to God, hey, one day, next life, give me a voice like his, because he was like so, you know, composed. So I'm trying to speak slowly. So thank you again, and I wish you a very great weekend, and we will be in touch. And thank you, audience, for being patient. And at that happy note, I wish you a really blessed and good weekend. If I'm allowed to use the word blessed in a secular setting, it can mean many things to many people. So be safe and talk to you later. Okay. Thank you so much.
And thank you for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Linda Har. Thank you.
Welcome. We'll be in touch. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.